Maybe I shouldn't have used the term scumbags, but it's irrelevant. Still, there's no justification for what they did.
We've all been angry or upset in emotional environments. It may have done things out of character. And that, when you don't have a voice, sometimes this leads to that. So figure out a way, a solution to give people a voice so they feel they can be heard other than burning down things and looting things.
As a black man, if I'd have came out and said all the cops suck, all the black people saying, I love that damn Charles Barkley. So you're always in an awful, awkward situation. But listen, as my grandmother said, I'm going to judge everybody by their own merits, black or white, and I'm going to be fair. And some people are going to agree with me, and some people are going to kiss my.
No one can say it like Charles can, but you know what's instructive here is that's a show about basketball. And yet what's going on in the country has gotten so big that even there it's part of the dialogue, and there are conversations like that going all over the country, especially with this new study that suggests that white police officers often view black boys as older and more guilty than their white counterparts. Can that be true? And what does it mean if it does? How do you even fix something like that? Marc Lamont Hill we have with us, CNN political commentator and professor at Morehouse College, and Tara Setmeyer, Republican strategist and a contributor to The Real News on the Blaze TV. It's good to have both of you here. Tara, let me ask you, what is your reaction to what just happened between Kenny and Sir Charles?
Well, you know, Charles Barkley, I think, is, he's Charles Barkley. So the way he expresses things, he does it in his own way. But the root of what he's talking about, I think, is a valid point. And oftentimes that difference of opinion within the black community is completely unaccepted. If you don't walk lockstep in, then you are excoriated, called every name in the book. Trust me, I get it every day. Just read my Twitter feed. But Charles Barkley, at least, is talking about aspects of this case that some more reasonable people who are trying to be fair about what's happening and not reacting in an emotional way are unable and unwilling to consider. And I think that it needs to be considered. Now, Kenny Smith, I think his response to Charles Barkley was a balanced response. It was reasonable. And if most people were reacting the way that Kenny Smith did to the difference of opinion, we'd get a lot farther along. But the emotions have run so high that rational thought, logical thought, and trying to find solutions has really gone out the window, and I think that's the sad byproduct of this.
Let's take one more beat on this, Marc, because what you do hear from many African Americans when they hear something like what Charles said is he's acting like he doesn't know. He's acting like there are equal stakes here between the men who get excessive force used on them and the officers involved, and that's naive. Is that an informed position, or is that just a bias in and of itself?
Well, I don't necessarily want to call him naive, and I wouldn't necessarily call someone unreasonable because they have an emotional response. Right now, young children, essentially, or early teens are being killed in the street, and that's something that requires an emotional response, and I don't think that an emotional response and an intellectual response are necessarily competing responses. I think we can be emotional and smart about this, and I think what makes people frustrated with Charles Barkley is that, not that he's naive, but that oftentimes he's lacking some level of nuance in his analysis. Yes, there are good police officers. There's tons of people. I have friends who are police officers. That's not the problem. The problem is that this is a systemic issue, and even though you can be a good individual person, if the police play a structural role in our communities that is problematic at the current moment, and historically as well, that becomes a bigger challenge, and that's what those studies that you referred to are talking about. A police officer might be well-intentioned. I don't know what's in Darren Wilson's head. I've never run around calling Darren Wilson a rabid racist. I don't know what's in his head. I don't know what was in the officer who killed Eric Garner's head. I don't know. But what I know is that if you see a black body in public space and that requires, in your mind demands a greater response, a more intense response than it does for white bodies,
right,
that is a problem, and the empirical data shows that.
So what do you do about it? And why would that be true? What do you do about it? Could you say, well, that's true because officers come across more people of color in their policing because they're in lower crime, they're in higher crime districts, and that winds up meaning that they're in more minority districts? Do you think that's the explanation?
Well,
and if so, is that acceptable?
Well, we can't dismiss that.
That's not the explanation.
We cannot dismiss that.
All right, so take on that factor, and then I'll come to you for the reverse.
Sure.
One.
I mean, this is the problem with this discussion because it's multifaceted. There are definitely issues to be discussed about police brutality. brutality, the abuse of power. I mean, you can go all the way from civil forfeiture, which is a problem, you know, and that cuts across black, white, yellow, green. That's everyone, to what's going on in high crime neighborhoods and in minority communities, why that crime rate is so high. You know, there's a criminologist in University of Missouri, David Klinger, who came out, he did a study. Over 10 years, there were 1,265 homicides in St. Louis. 90% of them were black. 90% of them were black on black.
But that's almost
yet,
the same for whites.
that's
86% of whites are killed by whites.
That's correct.
So I don't know how leading it is.
No, but my point in that is that when we talk about that there's an epidemic or there's an open season on our, you know, young black men being gunned down in the street because of rogue racist white officers, that's just not the case. That only 2% of the homicides in St. Louis over 10 years were from cops, not necessarily white cops. So we need to put it in perspective. There are issues that need to be resolved in each one of these aspects that we can address reasonably, but I don't think that that's what's happening right now. When you see these crowds and masses of people, I think their anger is misplaced, and this is, I mean, for what's happening.
Yeah, so what is the question, Mark?
But no, it's not the question, because right now, as I understood the question, we're talking about why police do this in the instances where it happens. Yes, we can always talk about black on black violence. We can also talk about cancer. We can talk about cigarette smoke. We can talk about alcohol. We can talk about high cholesterol. All these things kill black people. But right now, we're talking about law enforcement, and oftentimes what happens is we're asked to chase this red ball of black on black violence, instead of staying on the issue for a moment. And yes, Tara's right. There is a high rate of crime with black people in some neighborhoods. That's absolutely true. But that does not explain why police see 12-year-old boys and think that they're 20. And yes, some police encounter more black criminals. But there are also police officers who only encounter white criminals because they're in white neighborhoods. And guess what? They still think that black boys are older than they are, and they still think that black men and women are more guilty than they are. This is a deeper issue than that. And to answer your question, Chris, about why that is, it's because historically we have had scripts in our society about who and what black people are. They're less intelligent. They're more prone to violence. They're less moral, they're less reasonable, all of these things. And if that's what we consume in our society, when you say a black person, that's what you understand. It has to do with the movies that we consume, the music that we listen to, but more
you
deeply,
and I agree on that, Mark.
But it's not just that, because then rap music becomes the kind of scapegoat.
Right.
This is
Well,
about
no,
a
it's a
deeper structural
contributing
problem. It has
factor.
everything to do with from the economy to the culture that we live in.
Hold on
I'm
a
not
second.
saying it's not a factor, but again, I don't want to chase the easy solution. Let's deal with the deeper
Right, but
solution.
you know what? Look,
That's
to Tara's point, as we end this particular segment, and we're going to do a lot of them, and that's the good news, is that we now have an opportunity to talk about things that we often neglect. The question is, will we talk about them when the urgency is gone, when the exigency of these horrible outcomes is gone? But it is multifaceted. Thank you for taking a look at it, Marc Lamont Hill. Tara, it's good to have you on the show.
Thank
Please
you.
come back. Let's keep talking about this. All right.